So far in the book, we are reading paper things. The main theme of the book is teen poverty. The two main characters, Gage and Ari, are living from house to house because their mom and dad died at a young age. Ari and Gage used to live with their foster parent Jana until Gage removed him and Ari from their household. He really wanted family to stick together and not think of the consequences, and did not think of the consequences of what could happen with Ari and how it could affect her emotionally. Ari used to be a starry student, and teachers never worried about her. Ever since Gage removed her from a good, safe environment, she has started to fall behind. Her main conflict was to get into Carter just like her mother, but she's having troubles because of her current living status. Hopefully soon things will work out. They will get a place to live. Ari can start to do well in school again and not be struggling emotionally.
Okay, so we're just gonna dive in with the questions. So did you ever feel like neglected when a new foster kid came into your home?
No, but I was older, so I was in high school and college when we started having foster kids, so I think that I was mature enough to understand that they were little and that I knew kind of what they had gone through too, so that helped.
How old were they usually?
It varied. So we had two boys who stayed with us who were pre-K and first or second grade, and they lived with us for 2 years. And then we had kids up through junior high, and then we had a little girl who stayed with us for quite some time, and she was 4 or 5-ish. My parents didn't take anybody who was older because I had 2 younger sisters, and so we were all a year apart. So they didn't want teenagers in the house because they felt like that could create more issues.
Okay. After experiencing what it's like to live in a house with foster kids, have you ever considered foster kids of your own because of what your childhood's like?
I absolutely have. That is something that I definitely want to do. So right now my kids are so little that I don't think that I could do it, but it is something that I would want to do. One thing you can do with foster kids is called respite, and you can have them they'll come for the weekend. So it's when their foster parents have something going on, or they need an emergency placement just for a weekend, and they just come stay for a few days and go on. So that's something that I'd like, that I can do now, and then go into full-fledged foster care when my kids are older.
Okay. Has anybody's stories or like things going on at home affected you emotionally, like feeling sorry for them?
Yes. So we had a little girl who stayed with us for quite some time, and she had been sexually abused by her mom's boyfriend, and her mom didn't believe her and said it was a lie. And they actually had proof that it had happened, so there was no question whether or not it happened. It did. And she would cry every single night. And if you guys think about when you were little, and if you were upset or scared, and probably you went to your parents' bedroom, you might have gotten in bed with them, you might have, like things like that you did to comfort them. Well, kids who have been sexually abused, and foster kids, you can't do that anyway, but especially kids who are sexually abused, you can't do things like that. So it makes it a little bit difficult to find ways to help them overcome that. So for that particular little girl, I was in college at that time, and I was living at home. So when she would wake up every night with her nightmares about what had happened, I would go in and sit on the side of the bed and hold her hand until she fell back asleep. She was probably like the most heart-wrenching one that we had, because she was so little and horrible things were done to her.
Do you still have any friendships of some of the foster kids that you lived with, or any connections to them?
So the 2 boys that lived with us for 2 years, their family was all from Clinton, and that's where I'm from too. And so I have tried to find them now as adults because I considered them my brothers, and they considered me and my sisters their sisters. And I've been unable to do that. I've been working I've really been trying hard to try to find them. So it's something that I'm not going to give up on.
How did you feel when a foster kid came in your house and you got really connected to them and they left?
It was horrible. So, especially Josh and Jeremy, the two that lived with us for 2 years. We had a party when they got adopted. I was really upset with my parents because I wanted them to adopt them, but my parents, me and my sisters were older. They didn't want to. They just wanted to do this as a temporary thing, and I was very upset with them. And then we had a party with their adopted parents, and I went in. We had a pantry, and I just went into the pantry and cried for like an hour, and then came back out and joined the party again. So it was really hard.
Okay, in our book, Gage, Ari's older brother, doesn't want to tell anyone they're homeless or that they're struggling. Did you ever feel like embarrassed to be in a home with foster kids?
Never. I felt proud of what we were doing.
Okay, and then in the book Paper Things, Ari and Gage felt as if Jana, their foster mother, was their parent figure. They seemed not to be afraid to ask for things that a kid would ask for their own parent. Was there ever ever a time that a foster kid in your home was afraid to ask for something they wanted?
They weren't, but they also, when kids go into foster care, they want them to get used to how life will be if they go back to their parents, like their biological parents. So, and oftentimes those parents are struggling financially and they don't have a lot of access to, some of the extra things that you might think of being able to go out and get. So my parents, they would actually say stuff to my parents saying, don't buy them so much stuff or don't let them do this because we're trying to get them used to going back to the other parents, and it'll make the transition really hard if you do that. That fully answer the question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Did you think of foster kids as your brothers and sisters?
The two that stayed with us for 2 years, yes. The other ones, they didn't stay there long enough that I think that we made a connection to call them my brother and sister. But Josh and Jeremy even called my mom and dad. So they were truly a part of our family. And I think the difference probably between them and the other kids was the other kids, we knew they were going to be transitioning back to their biological parents. So they would go with their their biological parents for holidays, any fun things like that for their birthdays, where Josh and Jeremy, we knew they weren't going back to their biological parents. So they stayed with us for every single holiday and, every family meal. They were there for everything. So I think that made the difference.
Those two kids, Josh and Jeremy, did they ever go back to their parents?
They ended up getting adopted.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, they went straight to adoption and then, and then stayed there.
And did you feel like the foster kids were ever jealous of you because you were living with your parents at your house?
Some of them, when we had older ones that were in junior high, they would be able to say stuff like, I wish that I could have this, or I wish it was like this for me every day. Because especially sometimes we would get kids who had been in multiple foster homes. So they might have been in, 5 or 6 different placements within a year, and all their stuff is in a garbage bag. That's what they bring it to you in, and so they don't really, that's all they get to take with them is what can fit in a garbage bag from place to place. So I think, not having your own room and your own place to call your own is really hard for them.
So did these foster kids, did they have a special room that they stayed in, or where did they stay?
Yeah, so we had this big older house, and me and my sisters, we each had a room, and then there was another bedroom up in the upstairs also that was, at first it had just been a spare bedroom, but then it became, when Josh and Jeremy were there, they chose to stay in the same room. They wanted to, I think probably because of what they'd gone through. And then anybody else that came, that was their bedroom too. And we always made it, like if it was a girl, if it was somebody that was staying for longer than a weekend, we made it to be their room. So it was, if it was a girl, it was pink bedspread or whatever they wanted. And for the boys, it was definitely a boys type of room. So.
How many foster kids were using your house at one time?
We would have some weekends where we would have 4, but usually we just had 1 to 2 at a time. So.
You've kind of already answered this already, but in the book, Gage and Ari stayed at Janice, their foster mother, ever since their mother died and left about a while after that. How long do the foster kids usually stay at your home?
So sometimes it was just a weekend. The little girl that stayed, she stayed for, it was several months. It wasn't quite a year though. And then the two boys stayed for 2 years.
Were there like ever some kids that came to your house that like you didn't like?
Yeah. There was one boy in particular that I can still remember he was a junior high kid, and he was, at that point, he was bigger than I was. And he definitely had a really rough life. And I was pretty sheltered, I would say, at that point. And he had tattoos that he had done himself on his arms that, like, he had written in ink and then used a pen that said, like, Mom, Dad, and other things. So that was probably just because he made me nervous. Not that he ever did anything bad, but I just worried about what could happen, I guess.
Did these kids like just stay with you? Did they go to school? Like the same school you went to?
No, and that's part of the reason why my parents didn't take anybody in high school. So, yeah, they had to be at least junior high or younger.
So how old were you when you started to meet foster?
The first, I would have been 16 or 17, right around there, like almost 17 probably. So that's when we had the first ones.
What would you say is like the most like interesting story like a foster kid ever told you?
Well, can I talk about a kid who was a foster kid when I was teaching rather than somebody who lived at our house? So I had a student when I was teaching, and this probably would have been 10 years ago or so, and he was in 5th grade, and he was put into foster care because his parents were physically abusing him. He had several broken bones, like he broke an arm, and then he would go back in the next month and he'd have a broken leg and then go back in. So he was little at that time, like 2 or 3. So very violent things were being done to him. And he was in a different foster home at least once a year. By the time he came to me in 5th grade, he'd been in 9 different foster homes. So he talked about how things were better in some places and worse in some places, and then what made them better. Like, didn't necessarily, the foster families that showed him love and caring, that wasn't necessarily his favorite place, because he knew that it was going to end and they were going to be taken away from him anyway. So he preferred the people who actually didn't care and didn't really care what he was doing, because he was afraid to form an attachment. So interesting. It was interesting to me because I would never have thought of it that way. It was really sad too.
Did you like having a foster kid in your house?
Absolutely, yeah. There's nothing that I would change about it.
Okay, so in the story, Gage feels responsible for Ari. Are there times when you are working with people that you want to reach out to really badly and help them a lot?
Mm-hmm. And some people are more open to having help than others are. Some are fearful that you're going to, they don't want to accept help because they're afraid you're going to try to take their kids away from them, which is not necessarily the case. Everybody goes through bad times, and some people go through worse times than others. But we'll have families sometimes here that don't have food, like literally have no food at all in their house, and don't want to reach out to the school because they're afraid that we'll call DCFS, which is who you call if somebody is being abused. So once we let parents know that it's not something, that it's okay to ask for help in situations like that, then we're able to form those relationships, and then they're more willing to ask for help in the future.
Okay, and then in Paper Things, the story we're reading, Ari has an older brother named Gage that made a decision to leave a safe home without her consent. If you have a sibling, did they ever make a really big decision without your consent, and how did you feel about it?
Okay, well, I can give you an example of my niece, who is, she's 19 right now, and when she was 16, she decided to move out of my sister's house and live on her own. And I did not feel like it was a good decision for her, because it's hard to be on your own when you're 16. So she couldn't find anybody who would rent her an apartment, because you have to be at least 18 to rent an apartment. So she just had to bunk with different people, and she went from place to place. She found out that it's really hard to go to school when you're living from place to place, because you never know which bus you need to get on, or if you even have access to an alarm clock or things like that. And she ended up having to drop out of school, and still doesn't have a diploma or a GED, and she's 19. So she's finally realized